There is an issue that has provoked a lot of debate over the last few days in this country, which for once isn't Brexit related, and that is the issue of returning or potentially returning ISIS brides. And it's focusing on one particular individual. She was part of a group of three teenagers that went from Gatwick Airport to Istanbul to get into Syria back in 2015. Her name is Shamina Begum, and this is her. So you can see the headline there in the London Times. They tracked her down and had a comprehensive. They have a comprehensive report on this. Now, understandably, the overwhelming public response is not a chance in hell. Uh, these girls knew what they were doing. They made a pact with the devil, and now they have to live with it. The fate of the other two, one is believed to have been killed in an airstrike in Raqqa in 2016, and she's unsure about the other one. The good news is ISIS is finally, it looks like it's finally facing absolute defeat. Um, Not that I think that Assad is any sort of liberator or his forces should be seen as such. It's kind of like, um, you know, cholera or bacteria or cholera or tuberculosis. I mean, between the brutality of ISIS and the brutality of Assad's forces. So I think it's good that ISIS is defeated, but I certainly don't think Russia and Assad should be held up as some sort of liberators. Anyway, in this case, it looks like it was the Kurds that liberated this particular area. The situation in Syria is incredibly complex, so there's a lot of different combatants actually on the ground. But I think we can all agree that the defeat of ISIS is a good thing. Um, Now, this issue of whether or not they come home, my my gut instinct is not a chance in hell. These people are traitors. They left the country because of a hatred of this country. The press shouldn't report it as fleeing Britain. There was nothing to flee. Um, and joining a vicious death cult really says a lot about their lack of values. But there's a few schools of thought. There's a few ways to look at this. Um, if they do return to the UK, or if she returns to the UK, rather, she's pregnant, I might add, which is a significant part of this. If she returns to the UK, the nightmare scenario or the headache would be she is put on trial, and then defense argues that she was a victim of brainwashing, and therefore she was too young to be responsible for her own actions, and she's let off the hook. Then there'll be extensive scrutiny of her behaviour because the public would demand that, but that would demand a lot of money. The counter argument is leave her there. The problem with that is the Kurds don't want her, and the Kurds have a situation where they're um, they're looking after, or they're, let's say, holding hundreds of foreign fighters. They need to feed them. They need to do something with them. Um, They could just execute them, and frankly, I wouldn't shed a tear, but it's not that simple. Um, so, like I said, my fear would be if she's brought back, I would like to see her put on trial and serve a very, very, very lengthy prison term. But the thing that's interesting about the interview, and this is where I think she's winning absolutely no favors, if she had told the Times correspondent, I was a stupid young girl, I made a terrible decision, and I was incredibly gullible, I totally regret what I'd done, and I totally denounce the barbarity of the organization I joined, there might be a fraction of sympathy because people might think, well, maybe she was incredibly naive, maybe she was a victim of brainwashing. But what's significant about her interview is her utter lack of remorse. And I quote, life in Raqqa, married to a Dutchman, had been largely normal. She said, the one I wanted, this is the Dutchman, seeing her first severed head in a bin didn't faze me at all. However, the group's oppression and corruption meant that I don't think they deserve victory. So she's showing absolutely no remorse. She's showing no sympathy to the victims of this evil death cult. And let's just remember the sort of things ISIS done. They burned men and women alive. They beheaded journalists. They beheaded aid workers. They were, maybe it's appropriate to use past tense, one of the most sadistic, evil terrorist groups in history. I think they even outdone Al Qaeda in sheer depravity. I mean, I remember those horrible images of men being put in cages and gradually lowered into the water so they would drown. Not to mention the thousands of women, the Yazidi women that they kept in sexual slavery. This is an evil, evil death cult. David Cameron was absolutely right when he said, if you're a young man, they will get you to blow yourself up, and if you're a young woman, you will become a sex slave. Um, I mean, even looking at this picture, she doesn't look like a victim to me. That looks like a smug sort of attitude of, oh, I'm British, so I should get to go back. If she does come back, I think she should be charged with treason. Now, it's true she was young at the time, 15 years old, but she's now 19. She's an adult. She's a young woman. And the danger would be if she came back and didn't get sentenced. I think because of the high profile nature of that, the public would demand that she get a custodial sentence. So any judge that let her off the hook would be, you know, that would provoke fury from the public. But it's not just about sentiments. There is a real threat here. Now, the Home Secretary, to his credit, is battling very hard to make sure she doesn't come back. And if Mr. Javid gets his way, then it will be up to the Kurds to decide what to do with her. I can understand their point of view, i.e., why should we hold on to a foreigner? But Kurdistan is not as yet a nation state, so it wouldn't be an extradition type thing because if she's in Kurdish hands, they don't have the power to get into those sort of state to state negotiations. The Assad regime were clearly not going to be negotiating with them, if she's handed over to regime forces. There will be some who sympathize with her and say, oh, she's a victim of brainwashing. And maybe she is. But regardless, she is dangerous. And those like her are dangerous. I remember when Canada accepted returning jihadists, Trudeau came out with an incredibly pathetic statement trying to compare them to Italian immigrants in the 30s, and that caused a big backlash against Justin Trudeau, rightly so. With all due respect to our Canadian friends, tolerance has a limit to the point where it's, common sense goes out the window. I know that different countries have different approaches. In Denmark, they treat them like victims. They don't get prison sentences. They're treated like victims of brainwashing, which I have to say I find utterly staggering. Now, there's no evidence that Shamina Begum has personally got her hands on any atrocities, but she's part of an organization that definitely has. As for the Danish situation, the idea that sadistic killers who may well have beheaded journalists or others who set women on fire, who throw gay men off buildings, who drown men in cages, these animals, the idea that they are treated like they're victims is beyond disgusting. Now, I don't think we should reduce ourselves to ISIS level, so I don't think we should like torture them or something. But I do think if we bring them back, they should certainly for the killers, they should spend the rest of their life in prison, like never be released ever. It should be whole life tariffs. As for the ISIS brides, they made the choice to go there, and we can argue brainwashing to an extent, but think of organizing a trip anywhere. That's a complex process, especially to a war zone. So these young women can't have been that stupid. I mean, the news is widely documenting ISIS atrocities. No doubt if she came back to a court here, she'll say she was brainwashing to think it was all propaganda. But that's the excuse. I remember seeing a guy from Germany, and he was a white convert. And when he came back, he said, oh, I was naive. I believed it was all Western propaganda. No, I think that's too much of a cop out. I think these people, especially adults, they need to be responsible for their own decisions. I mean, let's not forget she went to Syria on the basis of a hatred for the West, a hatred for this country. We don't know if she's got blood on her hands directly or not, but even if she doesn't, I mean, put it this way: in the UK, if someone is complicit to a murderer, they may get a lighter sentence, but they're not exactly, seen. Well, I could make lots of analogies, but yeah, I don't know what's the way forward. I don't think she should come back. I think it would cost too much money. Also, as was pointed out earlier on CNN, it takes a risk for negotiators to go over there. That's putting British diplomats at risk. It's still an active war zone, so why should they risk their lives to negotiate her release, or at least negotiate her being brought back to the UK? As for her unborn child, that's an issue. The view I take on that is, and this will be controversial, her child is innocent, totally innocent. I don't think the children of ISIS combatants should be punished for the depravity of their parents. So if there's some sort of government aid program, I think it should be directed in a way whereby she is incarcerated, but her child is looked after, something like that. But I have no personal sympathy with her. I mean, 15 is young, but I refuse to believe that a 15-year-old doesn't know that cutting someone's head off is wrong. I get that young people are impressionable. I mean, when I was 17, I was pretty naive about the world, but how naive do you need to be to go to an active war zone, join a vicious death cult, and I think she's beyond hope. I really don't think there's any hope for someone like that. She claims she just wants to live a quiet life here. No, I don't think she could be trusted because she's already brainwashed. If, well, that seems to be what's coming across. That means she could easily get in touch with, if not ISIS, another Islamist group. We're assuming it's just ISIS. There's other Islamist groups out there. There's Boko Haram in Nigeria. There's others. So she could easily get in touch with one of them. And the amount of money MI5 would have to spend on surveying her. The terrorist attacks in 2017, there was a lot of criticism of the security services that the attackers were on the radar for a long time and nothing was done about them. So they understandably will want to avoid a repeat of those accusations. I can understand why the Home Secretary is fighting this. Let me know your thoughts.